A recent study declared that transgenderism is in rapid decline among young Americans. In addition, a GLAD study reports that nearly half of all LGBTQ plus characters will disappear from TV in the next season. This includes 61% of trans characters. This is great news. However, the ideologies and practices promoted by so called experts that made it a thing in the first place are now leading our young people down a much more dangerous path. And if we don't wake up fast, it is going to destroy America as we know it. So, here's my 2 cents on all of this. Growing up in the 70s and 80s, I loved Laura Ingalls Wilder in the Little House on the Prairie series. So much so, I wanted to be a teacher since I can remember. I fulfilled that dream and spent a good part of the 90s in the classroom as a math teacher. By that time, the education system had established a new ideology that many blindly bought into because the experts told us it's what we should be doing. These experts told teachers and parents that students were struggling because their self-esteem was being harmed. Students who didn't perform as well as others, whether that be academically, athletically, musically, or in any other manner, were suffering from low self-esteem as a result. Therefore, we stopped awarding place trophies and everyone got a participation trophy. We downplayed competition and we started easing up on our grading system. Kids' basketball leagues stopped counting outs, and if football and basketball teams got too far ahead, they were criticized for not playing fair and hurting the other team's feelings. My husband was on a summer baseball team in the 80s as a kid, and as they were just starting to introduce this ideology, he remembers having a terrible team, but at the end of the season, the team members got a trophy. He remembers even then realizing how ridiculous it was for them to get something even though they were terrible. They sucked and they knew it. Why reward that? What incentive is there now to do better? The best kids on the team, who really worked hard to be so, don't get special recognition and rewarded for their efforts, while those who did nothing still get patted on the back. We can pretend this spares one's self-esteem, but the damage it does to one's identity is immeasurable and much more costly in the end. For me, this ideology had not yet affected my portion of the world in school, even though my husband and I were in school together. I was in several AP classes and did okay, but there were others who were much smarter than me, and I accepted that. I still studied and tried my best, and I never expected the teachers to reward me for something I did not achieve on my own. I didn't become depressed or withdrawn or melt down because somebody did better than me. Instead, I studied harder. In fact, I was in calculus my senior year of high school, and my teacher was tough. It was a big deal to get an A from him, and by golly, I wanted an A. I was going to be a math teacher, for heaven's sake. Therefore, I buckled down and I studied. I studied hard. And in the third quarter, I achieved my goal. I got an A, and it was so sweet because no one gave it to me. No one reduced requirements or dumbed down the curriculum so I could get an A. In fact, if they had, it would have been an empty achievement. Instead, I earned the A. I was proud of that A because I put in the time and effort to achieve that A. I spent hours in my bedroom doing practice problems and reviewing my notes over and over and over. That A was mine. That did more for my self-esteem than endless participation trophies ever could. But again, academics was not my strongest suit. In general, I focused on where I did stand out. Music. I played viola, and I was first chair in 2 different student orchestras for the vast majority of my time in those groups. I was also in the marching band, pep band, and jazz band, playing keyboard and percussion instruments. Again, for 3 of those 4 years in marching band, the director trusted me to rehearse and guide the students in that group, relying on my experience and musical talents to take on that role. That was my identity. Likewise, the vast majority of my classmates in the band and orchestra found joy, uniqueness, and identity as musicians. But as I played in the pit orchestra for the school's musicals, I marveled at my classmates who had the talent and ability and guts to get on stage and sing, dance, and act. That was their identity. I wasn't jealous of them. I actually admired them. Then there were those classmates who took advantage of the industrial arts classes in our high school offered: auto repair, home economics, art classes, and other hands on opportunities. Many of them went on to thrive in such careers. So, what did the experts do? They took all of that away. They dumbed down, and in some districts, they discontinued AP classes altogether because it might make students who don't have that particular skill feel bad, while also greatly hindering the competition performing arts provides. Likewise, they eliminated our industrial arts and basic classes, such as ones that taught things like balancing a checkbook, living on a budget, managing a home, and simply cooking, sewing, and basic language skills, pushing everyone into the same classes regardless of ability. I saw this while teaching in Texas. We trashed all our basic math classes, forcing everyone into algebra their freshman year. Mind you, this included a large amount of students that teachers were forced to pass on each year in elementary school, even though they lacked the most fundamental skills in math. You know what destroys self-esteem faster than competition? Forcing students into classes they're not proficient in just to make everyone equal. I can't tell you how many discouraged faces I saw in my classroom because students were placed in classes where their abilities did not match the curriculum. And that applies to students both below and above the curriculum level. As a result, we are now graduating record number of students who can't even read, write, or do simple math, while telling them that their only course of action is college. In fact, these brilliant experts are now telling parents to ask their babies if they want their diaper changed. They're claiming it teaches babies they have the right to give consent to be touched. So, what if the child doesn't give consent? Does the parent not change the diaper? Do they let the baby sit around in their own excrement for hours, risking infection, and this is somehow healthier for the child if they aren't ready to have their diaper changed yet? Or do they go ahead and change the diaper anyway, teaching the child it really doesn't matter if you give consent or not, the adult will touch them? Or, just as bad, you're teaching the child you are expecting a positive reaction for consent without them even thinking about it, which completely defeats the so-called purpose of the exercise of consent. Reality is, you are breeding a generation of children who are indoctrinated to say yes to authority without actually giving it a thought. If we let this take hold, I'm going to tell you right now where this could lead. It will destroy the meaning of consent where it is most important, in sexual situations. As a result, experts will start pushing for consent where it has no worth. Teachers having to ask students if they want to do homework. Bosses having to ask workers if they feel like working that day. Police officers having to ask criminals if they can arrest them because that's touching too. That sounds ridiculous, but people mocked those of us saying we were going to have serious problems if we take away competition and merit-based rewards. And look where we are now. I and many others warned at the time that we were raising generations to become weak adults who would whine whenever they didn't get their way or demand everyone submit to their whims and beliefs. They would not be able to take criticism and melt down whenever they were told no, especially in real life. Unfortunately, we were 100% correct, and it's even worse than we thought. I'm not a prophet or had some secret knowledge. I just know history. I know what God wants for humanity, and I understand how sinful people will fall even harder if not given barriers, guidelines, rules, and yes, discipline to help them navigate through a fallen world. For decades now, we have watched educators turn our children into cookie-cutter students who are all expected to perform equally, refusing to commend those for achieving above the average or recognize and encourage those not performing up to standards. We remove the means by which students used to find their identities in nature and by normal means. They weren't allowed to stand out in science class, showcase their musical, artistic, or athletic talents, or find pride in fixing a car's engine. Instead, we focused on climate change, diversity, equity, inclusion, toxic masculinity, gender studies, and white privilege. We told white children they are and will always be racist. Therefore, they deserve nothing and should step aside for minorities, while telling minorities they will always be oppressed and should expect to never be allowed to achieve their real potential, as whitey will always keep them down. As a result, white children stopped achieving, and black children never even tried. Think about it. How many times over the past few years have you heard liberals insult white people who accomplish something by saying it only happened because of white privilege? Likewise, how many times have you heard liberals, especially black ones, insult black people who accomplish something by accusing them of trying to be white?
So if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
So successful whites are only successful because they're white, and successful blacks are only successful because they're acting white. Does anyone else see how incredibly ignorant and evil this is? We must start calling this ideology out for what it is: unadulterated and disgusting racist bullcrap. Seriously, when in history have we ever seen a country's leadership, experts, and educators so degrade its own people while praising foreigners? Why would you do that? And what would be their goal? After years of this indoctrination, robbing our children of their true identities, we then shut everything down, locked kids in their homes, and flooded their minds with transgender and furry propaganda wrapped up in easily accessible pornography. Children, desperate to find an identity that would be accepted, gravitated to these expert-approved ideologies because they filled the void that these same propagandists opened. Students started finding a way to be accepted by society, especially white boys, who've been beaten down for just being white and male. If they can't stand out on merit, or just being themselves for that matter, as that is discouraged by educators and society, they'll find their identities in what is recognized and embraced by experts who define what is acceptable: homosexuality, transgenderism, and furry lifestyles. Experts told us to read My Two Mommies to preschoolers, allow boys in girls' bathrooms, and to affirm children who identify as animals. So in just about 35 to 40 years, we've gone from developing our identities on merit-based performance to centering our identities around LGBTQ performance art, and it is destroying our children, our country, and our future. Don't believe me? Look at what Virginia Democrats are trying to do. They want to force history on their students based on gender and racial identity politics instead of actual history based on merit. If this goes through, expect multiple blue states to follow suit. But like I said in the intro, we are actually seeing a decrease in transgenderism in our college campuses at this time. That's a step forward, except progressives are taking us 2 steps back as our children face other realities as they are still trying to find their identities while also starting to back away from LGBTQ. It is opening a void, and again, the woke progressives are right there with their next scheme. Completely discouraged about their future, lost about what to do with their lives, and in massive debt, our young adults are being targeted and persuaded by Democrat socialists promising them the world through socialism, communism, and Marxist philosophy. A philosophy that has never, ever worked. Whether they call themselves progressives, Marxists, or Democrat socialists, it is all the same ideology and always ends in the same place: pure totalitarian communism. Generation Z has been so beaten down, they just want something different than what they're experiencing right now. Educators, Hollywood, and influencers have brainwashed them to believe that they're in dire straits because of capitalism. The truth is, we haven't had true capitalism since President Woodrow Wilson, America's premier progressive, entered office in 1913. Utopian socialist progressive ideologies have infected, hindered, and destroyed our country for 100 years while claiming capitalism is the culprit. But who's telling our children they can fix what's wrong? The ones that broke it. And what's their solution? Expanding the very policies that got us here in the first place. Regardless, as our children go down the road to socialism, they have arrived at the place it always leads: violence. Growing up, my mother and father taught me sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never harm you. Yet experts have spent the last 30 plus years insisting we can't say anything negative to children. As I said before, we were told it was harmful to their self-esteem to tell them no. That has led us to today, where massive pressure is being placed on social media outlets to censor posts that the experts say are unacceptable, with people in Europe being arrested and jailed under claims of inciting racial hatred or sharing other impermissible rhetoric, like insulting a Muslim child abuser or being pro-life or even sharing a cartoon, while the actual offenders are being released with a slap on the wrist. Before you cheer this action, ask yourself who gets to decide what is harmful and what happens when the person making those decisions has a problem with your posts. So, we have gone from words will never harm you to words are violence, justifying an actual violent response of not only throwing sticks and stones, but bricks, bats, frozen water bottles, Molotov cocktails, and anything else you can find. In the case of Donald Trump and Charlie Kirk, you're even allowed to use a gun because you didn't like what the person was saying, and after you've spent years calling them Nazis, fascists, white supremacists, and tyrants. Likewise, Renee Good was trained to resist and disrupt ICE agents, including using her 4-ton vehicle as a weapon. By their own definition, progressive activists have been committing violence against conservatives for decades, believing their words justified their actions. This film of a former Antifa member sheds even more light on their underlying behavior.
Say they're going to kill someone, or they think it's justified to attack someone because they're a fascist, for example.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's like whether it's people deserve to die, they have no human rights. It's like calling someone a Nazi or a fascist. It's a way to just dehumanize them. You can do whatever to them. You can assault them. It's funny to them. They laugh about it. They don't kill you because you're a fascist. They call you a fascist so they can kill you. You know, it's just a way to dehumanize people and threaten them. Originally, they were trying to bully and threaten like what they would consider right-wing extremists, like Proud Boys or like Christian nationalists, you know, that show up to protests or events. They're bullying them. That's not the target anymore. Now the target is anyone that doesn't agree with them.
Now they are openly calling for civil war, declaring the time for peaceful protest is over. The time for nonviolent action is over. The fascists who support Trump's destruction of the rule of law and disdain for the Constitution do not play by the rules. Fellow citizens, arm yourselves before it's too late. Again, calling Trump fascist, not because he is one, but as an excuse to freely kill him and his supporters. Also notice the abolish the Second Amendment people are telling people to buy guns. They are openly calling for attacks on the government, with one poster even saying, do what's right, not what's legal. Who decides what is right? Each individual person? Likewise, we're a nation of laws. What happens when the people decide to break them and certain leaders refuse to enforce them? The Bible states multiple times people were doing what was right in their own eyes. These references are not compliments or endorsements. They were major warnings, and when the people are there, it never turns out well for them. Did you know that Antifa is highly populated by LGBTQ community members? It has been dubbed Trantifa. Likewise, we have seen a stark increase in transgenderism and furries among our violent criminals. Do you think this is a coincidence? The truth is finally starting to be revealed as the violence in the trans community is becoming unquestionably evident. Take a look at this tweet from conservative commentator Benny Johnson. At the end of last year, it was confirmed attempted Trump assassin Thomas Crooks used they-them pronouns, had a deep interest in furries, and was exploring gender identity. As Benny points out, this just adds to the list of other recent shooters that identify and associate with the LGBTQ, primarily trans, community. Charlie Kirk's assassin, Tyler Robinson, as well as the shooters at the Annunciation Catholic Church, Nashville Christian Church, Lakewood Church, Colorado Springs, Denver's Highland Ranch Church, Aberdeen, Maryland, and Iowa's Perry High School. The Nashville Christian shooter was not only trans, her manifesto confessed she chose Covenant Christian School because she was specifically targeting white people. She was transgender, she was white, and she hated white people. In November, we had a transgender attack federal agents in Charlotte, North Carolina. Fortunately, there were no serious injuries. In early January, Vice President J.D. Vance's Cincinnati home was vandalized by a transgender with recorded mental health issues. And then we have Renee Good, who was part of the LGBT community as a lesbian. And let's add to that Minnesota Antifa member Kyle Wagner, who is also a social media influencer. And he told people to, quote, get your effing guns and stop these effing people. Looking bold and tough with the Antifa Iron Front logo tattooed on his neck, he commands his followers to take up arms against the federal government. However, this rough and rowdy Antifa warrior has other hobbies besides fighting the feds. After a hard day of protesting, Mr. Wagner likes to dress up and have an evening out on the town. What a surprise. But none of this is organic. It started decades ago. Before progressive experts eliminated our children's merit-based identity options, they removed God from our schools, our society, our communities, and in many cases, our churches. Once they destroyed our schools, our children needed to fill the void. Without God, they started doing what was right in their own eyes and became their own gods. And they turned to the only options the experts gave them, LGBTQ and socialism. Did you notice how many churches and Christian schools were included in the list I gave? Don't forget, anti-ICE rioters stormed a church in St. Paul, violently forcing their way in to terrorize the congregation, which included children. In fact, they blocked the stairs, preventing parents from reaching their children in the Sunday school rooms while screaming at the children that their parents were Nazis and going to hell. This was not a peaceful protest protected by the First Amendment, as Don Lemon, another proud gay man, declares. It was domestic terrorism and a common tactic used by communists and socialists to force people into silence or force people into a fight. Fortunately, we now have a DOJ that is taking action against this lawlessness, as several arrests have already been made, including Don Lemon himself. And for the record, Don, you don't get to hide behind the freedom of the press while doing whatever you please. The Biden DOJ proved journalists can be arrested and convicted by going after several conservative ones who were obviously observing and reporting on events at the Capitol on January 6th and not actually participating, including ones that didn't even breach the building. You, on the other hand, locked arms with the group that stormed a place of worship, fully engaging in unlawful activity as defined by the FACE Act. Under the FACE Act, the Biden DOJ prosecuted and incarcerated many pro-life advocates, several of which were elderly, for just praying at an abortion clinic. Fortunately, the act also applies to churches, and the Biden DOJ has set a pretty hard precedent. But here's the plain truth. This has been the progressive plan for over 100 years. They initiated this unquestionable allegiance to experts and their opinions, allowing them to hijack and guide the culture while calling foul if they were ever scrutinized. What better way to control a society than to put all authority in unelected people who are not allowed to be contested, contradicted, or held accountable? But there is hope. Thanks to those like Charlie Kirk and others, Gen Z is actually searching for other options, and they are finding them. They are turning back to the Bible, to church, and to Christ. When you identify as a child of God, that puts you on the only path that matters. There will still be struggles and hard times, but when God is your guiding light, when you follow His word and commandments, all this other noise becomes just that, noise. And that's exactly what progressives don't want. They want chaos. They want you confused, desperate, and therefore ripe for their propaganda. They want you so discouraged that you will grab whatever option they put in front of you to make the hurting stop and make the pain go away, like socialism, Marxism, and destructive sexual desires. I left teaching in the 1990s because I saw all this coming, and I refused to participate in the destructive directives of the experts. However, I've never lost my love for teaching, which is why I spent 7 years writing liberating letters, and I'm now doing these videos. I left the classroom, but I never left the fight. May we heed the warnings and turn from our wicked ways, and may God hear our prayers and heal our nation as we fight those who are actively trying to destroy this amazing country He gave us. But that's just my 2 cents. What do you think? Leave your comments down below. If you enjoyed my content, please consider supporting my work on Patreon. You can find all my videos in my blog, Liberating Letters, at thefactspaper.com. You can also start your own research on the Facts Paper by exploring the thousands of links to articles I have, including those noted in my videos. Sharing the truth fake news propagandists won't. Investigate and discover the truth for yourself.